Late last year, while I was live on Twitch, I issued a challenge to the chat to see if they could collectively defeat the Pokémon League in Gold and Silver. The only rule I imposed was that they had to play as Giovanni, the boss of Team Rocket. Since he doesn't appear in these games, that's why his admins are searching for him throughout the game. I decided to use his team from Red and Blue, the one you face in the Viridian Gym, the last one of the first generation. And let me tell you, this team is far from up to par with the standards of the next generation. While the Pokémon may look tough, most of their moves are pretty lackluster, making you wonder if Giovanni truly deserves to be a gym leader. His first Pokémon is Rhyhorn, at level 45, but it only knows normal type moves, 3 of which are typically associated with low-level Pokémon. Next up is Dugtrio, level 42, which can only really rely on Dig, its stab move, to deal decent damage. Then there's Nidoqueen, and it's even worse here, because Body Slam is the only noteworthy move, and I should mention that it's a TM you can get before taking on Latent Surge, otherwise it doesn't know anything good. Her male counterpart, Nidoking, is also on the team, with moves that are more or less similar. I think Thrash, its best move here, is used in speedruns when the player is still in Cerulean City. Finally, Giovanni's best Pokémon is Rhydon, level 50, which at least knows 2 moves, Horn Drill and Fissure, that can potentially knock out an opponent's Pokémon, though the chances are slim. These moves are a bit of a gamble, and beyond that, it can only defend itself with Stomp. Overall, this team would struggle against your average trainer's Pokémon, especially since it's a monotype team. Besides Dugtrio's Dig, none of them have anything super effective, or even neutral, against many opponents, and to make matters worse, I've only mentioned 5 Pokémon, so the gym leader is already handicapping himself by having an empty slot in his team when an extra Pokémon could have been helpful. But here's where it gets interesting. Other than setting up this base team, I didn't impose any additional rules. The chat was free to catch Pokémon on Victory Road, or even completely change the team by exploring the game. For example, while I made sure to empty the wallet, the bag contains around 20 random items, and most importantly, all the TMs and HMs from the game, so there are ways to improve this team's terrible move pool. But first, the chat needs to realize that, and then they need to agree on the best moves to use. The game begins at the Pokémon League Center in Kanto, and the chat takes control of the avatar for the evening, checking out the team before them. They decide to lead with Nidoking, which isn't a bad choice. It's a very good Pokémon. However, I'm not sure if it'll be useful against the first trainer, Will, who has Psychic-type Pokémon. Nevertheless, Giovanni heads to the first room, takes a deep breath, and ascends the stairs. Against Will's first Xatu, Nidoking uses Thrash, dealing decent damage before taking a Psychic. At this point, it's a different story. Nidoking loses over 100 HP, barely surviving the encounter. With the next Thrash, it surprisingly manages to two-shot Xatu, and the battle continues. Will sends out Jinx, and since Nidoking is faster at this level, it lands another Thrash, bringing Jinx's HP into the red. Unfortunately, Nidoking falls to another Psychic at the end of the turn, and Nidoqueen, the other member of the Nidoran family, steps in. With a simple Body Slam, her best move, Nidoqueen finishes off Jinx, a fairly threatening Pokémon. Next up is Slowbro, and once again, Nidoqueen is faster. She even scores a critical hit before Slowbro's special defense sharply increases. No matter, all of Giovanni's Pokémon use physical attacks, and Will catches on, using Curse on the next turn to further boost his Pokémon's defense. Body Slam becomes less and less effective as Slowbro lands 2 consecutive Psychics, which eventually take down Nidoqueen. Rhyhorn is then sent out, and with a simple Stomp, eliminates Will's third Pokémon. It's a decent start, but then they face Exeggutor, who doesn't hesitate to fire off a Psychic, almost one-shotting Rhyhorn. Stomp, in return, does very little damage, so after 2 turns, the chat goes back to the bag to select a new Pokémon. They choose their 6th evolution, Rhydon, the first Pokémon ever created in the game, and its Stomp seems to be a 2-shot. Exeggutor uses Leech Seed to regain a bit of HP, but fortunately, it only activates at the end of the next turn. With the second attack, Giovanni is now 1 Pokémon away from victory. Will's last Pokémon is another level 42 Xatu, which is faster this time, but its Psychic doesn't deplete Rhydon's HP entirely. The Leech Seed does its work, but Rhydon manages to hang on long enough to finish the battle. The chat claims their first victory. Well done. However, at this early stage of the game, very few players were coordinated enough. The problem now is that they didn't think to organize before entering the league, so they don't have any resources in the bag to heal their Pokémon. There are some interesting items, like the Pink Bow, a Max Elixir, or even items that could be sold to make money, but it's too late now, and the chat is in the league with no way to turn back. It's a tough break, but after digging a little deeper in the bag, they finally find the collection of TMs, most of which can only be used once, which could prove invaluable for the rest of the challenge. On a whim, he decides to teach Headbutt, TM02, to Rhydon instead of Tail Whip. That way, he has 2 normal type moves. Interesting choice, one might say, but the decision is made and it's irreversible. Another move quickly learned is TM23, Iron Tail, which he teaches to Nidoqueen in place of Scratch. Finally, Seismic Toss replaces Body Slam on the same Pokémon, which still knows Double Kick. This is the first small misclick by the players on the chat. They are so active that they end up replacing Iron Tail with Ice Punch by accident, wasting the TM, which would have been super effective if he had kept it, and at the worst, it could have been sold for a few thousand Pokédollars, useful for buying healing items. And as if that weren't enough, after mashing the A button, the move is replaced again, this time with Double Team. Chaos ensues for the player, who is now showing poor management of the bag, having only defeated the first member of the Elite Four. After wandering a bit in Koga's room, the battle finally begins. Ariados faces Dugtrio, who immediately uses Growl to lower the spider's attack, probably because it's the first move that comes up when you mash the A button. Meanwhile, Ariados uses Double Team to increase its evasion. A few turns later, Dugtrio still hasn't managed to deal damage to Ariados, who has drained all its health with Giga Drain. Giovanni is down to his last Pokémon, Pokemon, Viridian, who wasn't ready for Koga's first Pokemon's Grass-type move, so it's back to the Pokemon Center, resulting in an obvious first defeat due to a lack of preparation, and most importantly, a lack of attention to the tools it owned, yet the player stubbornly returns to the league without stopping by the shop, even though they technically have no items to heal properly. However, we've seen that he's capable of beating Will, and he repeats the performance before facing Koga again, with just one Pokemon left, and it's HP in the red. Okay, second defeat, and this time the player checks the PC to see if I left a surprise, which of course I didn't, as I had no intention of making it that easy. He then returns to the bag to teach Shadow Ball TM to Nidoking. Raiden's headbutt is replaced with rollout. Okay, fair enough. And right after that, Giovanni heads back to the league again, only to turn around to talk to the shopkeeper. With the money he earned from previous battles, he tries to buy hyper potions, but alas, the bag is full, so he starts selling items, including TMs he knows he won't use, but he still insists on returning to the Pokemon League without buying healing items. And this time, he even loses the battle against Will, losing a good portion of his money. The problem of healing items remains unresolved. After freeing up a new budget of 13,335 Pokédollars, Giovanni finally buys hyper potions and revives. Will that be enough for the upcoming battles? Either way, Nidoking learns Thunderbolt and Raiden Thunder Punch, an interesting choice given Raiden's rather low special attack stat, to be honest. So, back to the league for another attempt. This time Will is defeated, and he only managed to KO 2 Pokemon, a significant improvement, especially since these 2 Pokemon can be healed. Now it's time to face Koga with a healthy team, and thanks to his first Pokemon, Raiden, Giovanni can take out Koga's first 3 Pokemon by effectively using Rollout, which has Stab here. During the battle, Raiden is even revived, and the player sacrifices Dugtrio. In the meantime, when Raiden returns, he one-shots both Fortress and Muck. Good, the player is finally playing to his strengths, and the second member of the Elite Four is defeated. Before taking on Bruno, Nidoking learns Surf and is placed in the lead. The ground poison Pokemon uses this move on Hitmontop first, but its power is underwhelming, so the player switches out Nidoking for Nidoqueen, who doesn't hesitate to use Earthquake. This finishes off Hitmontop, and it also two-shots both Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan. A great start to the match for Giovanni, though he loses his Nidoqueen in the battle, but it doesn't matter, he still has resources left. While I expected Nidoking to come back to Surf against Onix, Raiden is chosen instead to finish the Rock Snake with Stomp. Machamp then enters the field, and Raiden lands a Thunder Punch, dealing decent damage before being knocked out by the Fighting-type Pokemon's attack. Unfortunately, only Nidoking remains, and it manages to get off a Surf, but it doesn't finish the job. Nidoking's HP is now in the orange, and to add insult to injury, Bruno heals his Pokemon, forcing the player to start all over. However, this move by Bruno inspires the player, who also goes to the bag, to heal Nidoking. It survives another cross-chop, but it won't be enough, as Nidoking's HP is back in the orange, another potion is needed, and this time Nidoking is in a position to attack. Machop is out of fighting-type moves, and with one final Thunder, Nidoking wins the battle. The third member of the Elite Four is defeated, this time with a lot of luck and using up several resources. The player now has very few healing items left, and as it's the end of the Twitch Plays Pokemon session, the player decides to lose the next battle to come up with a new strategy for the following week. Before the next attempt, several of Giovanni's Pokemon are given items or berries to hold. This is the only significant change before facing Will again. Unfortunately, it's not enough, as the final Jatu in the battle manages to defeat Giovanni's last Pokemon. More adjustments are needed in the team, so Dugtrio learns Sludge Bomb, because strangely, neither of the Nidos can learn this stab move, which would have been helpful against them. However, they can learn Fire Blast, so Nidoqueen forgets Double Team to learn this move. Also, Nidoking forgets Trash for Fire Punch, but the item management is completely chaotic, and in the process, Nidoqueen forgets Fire Blast to learn Blizzard, even though she still knows Tail Whip or Poison Sting, which would have been better to forget. After these adjustments, the team faces Will again, and they take him down, just as they do with Koga, before facing Bruno once more. This time, Machamp defeats most of the team. There's no more time to waste. Giovanni decides to sell off a large part of his inventory to stock up on potions, knowing that this time he must succeed in the Pokemon League, or consider another plan, like leaving, or going back to training. Against Will, Giovanni asks to use out Tail Whip, which is a rather ridiculous move, while Jatu uses Psychic, dealing heavy damage. As Nidoqueen repeats the process, she is knocked out in 2 turns. Not a great start, but luckily Nidoking saves the day with Shadow Ball, putting things back on track. Jinx is sent out next, but similarly, it's one-shotted by Shadow Ball, an old generation physical attack. To counter this, Will sends out Slowbro, who survives the first hit from Nidoking, but since it prefers to boost itself rather than attack, it's knocked out right after. Nidoking is doing excellent work, even one-shotting Will's second Jatu, leaving only Exeggutor to save the match. Once again, Shadow Ball deals damage, but Exeggutor responds with Psychic. Nidoking could survive if it uses Shadow Ball again, but the chat opts to use Surf in the second round of the duel, which isn't enough to defeat Exeggutor, who then finishes off Giovanni's second Pokemon. Raiden is sent in to close the match, and after healing up his Pokemon, Giovanni faces Koga. Nidoking leads once more, and with its Fire-type move, it one-shots the opposing Pokemon. Venomoth is chosen as the replacement, but it's also a Bug-type Pokemon, just like the previous one, making it easy for Giovanni to keep spamming the A button to use the Fire move again. It's not fatal, but since the opposing Pokemon misses its Supersonic, it's finished off in the next turn. To counter Giovanni's fire-type attacks, Koga sends out Fortress, and there's no need to explain. You literally only have to press one button here, so Crobat is sent out quickly. The bat manages to deal some damage, but since Giovanni keeps spamming the A button, fire-type attacks continue, forcing Koga to heal his Pokemon if he wants to stay in the fight. A few turns later, Nidoking finishes off Koga's second-generation Pokemon, who had given everything it could. In any case, none of Giovanni's Pokemon were knocked out in this match, and Giovanni switches his lead to bring in Rhydon, the most experienced Pokemon on the team. It's a bit of a missed opportunity here, as Rhydon keeps using Stomp, while Muk fails to use its most well-known move, Minimize, which is the perfect counter to Stomp, a little-known fact among the public. Nonetheless, after a while, Rhydon chains together several rollouts and finishes the battle. There's barely any need to heal before facing the third member of the Elite Four. Nidoqueen leads this time, and finally uses a useful move, Earthquake, which deals solid damage to Hitmontop, and even more so when it's in its tunnel using Dig. Hitmonchan is next, and Earthquake alone wreaks havoc, guaranteeing a 2-hit KO, while the Boxer deals very little damage with Ice Punch. Unfortunately, Ice Punch freezes Nidoqueen, the worst status condition possible, and Giovanni is unable to respond to this setback, leaving Nidoqueen frozen, and then KO'd by the Boxer. Back to the bag, Giovanni calls on Nidoking for help again, and interestingly, it uses Fire Blast to take down Hitmonchan. Hitmonlee is up next, and the first generation speedrun Pokemon chooses to Spam Surf. It's a 2-ish KO, as Hitmonlee's fighting-type moves aren't very effective, and Bruno calls out Onix, who is taken down easily. Giovanni is once again facing Machamp, who caused his previous defeat, but with a healthier team, Nidoking doesn't hesitate to use Surf again, which has worked well so far, while Machamp deals Cross Chops that aren't too scary unless they crit. This forces Bruno to use a max potion on his Pokemon, and eventually, a critical hit puts the battle back in the same situation. One last Surf, and it's over. Giovanni has reached the final obstacle he has yet to overcome, Karen, but now he has plenty of potions, ready to face the last Elite Four member and the champion. The Nido couple is well prepared, and Karen is challenged to a battle. Nidoking is chosen as the lead, but due to a misclick, it uses Shadow Ball on Umbreon, a move that's not very effective, while Umbreon retaliates with Sand Attack. It seems the opponent's Pokemon is harmless, so it's just a matter of landing the right moves, starting with selecting better ones, like Thunder, which brings Umbreon's HP into the orange zone. However, it would be better to use Surf, a move with 100% accuracy, which is optimal when our accuracy has been slightly lowered. Consequently, the opponent's Avolition is KO'd, and Vileplume replaces it, starting off with Stun Spore, which heavily hampers Nidoking, but in the next turn, despite taking a powerful Petal Dance, Nidoking's Fire Punch hits. One-shotting the flower Pokemon, Murkrow is called in next, and as expected, Thunder fails, while the opponent's powerful move finishes off Nidoking for this battle. Now it's Rhydon's turn, and it takes no less than 2 stomps to force Karen to send in a new Pokemon. It's Houndoom, which in turn forces us to switch out after taking significant damage. Rhyhorn is sent into battle, attempting to mimic its evolved form, but with less success, prompting Karen to heal her Pokemon, allowing her to neutralize us. Once Rhyhorn is knocked out, Rhydon returns to the fight, and though it takes heavy damage from Crunch, it manages to defeat the Hellhound when it gets the chance to attack. Only Gengar remains now, the last Pokemon. Unfortunately, in a hurry, the player uses a normal type move, forgetting that ghost types are immune to it. Luckily, Gengar has already halved its own HP, so even though Rhydon falls in the next turn, the team is just a few HP away from facing the champion. Nidoqueen re-enters the fray, and knowing that it has Earthquake, logically uses Poison Sting once, twice, 3 times, before getting paralyzed. At this point, it uses Tail Whip to the dismay of the player and probably everyone else in the chat, before finally landing Earthquake to finish the battle. And just like that, a new obstacle is overcome, although it almost ended in disaster after about 10 hours of gameplay. Giovanni is finally facing the champion, ready for an epic showdown. A few minutes later, the team is fully healed, and Lance locks eyes with us. Nidoking faces off against Gyarados, and although Thunder seems like the obvious choice, the player instead uses Shadow Ball, dealing much less damage. Perhaps this was to bait Gyarados into using Rain Dance, so that Thunder wouldn't miss for the rest of the battle. Yes, that must be it. Fortunately, Nidoking isn't KO'd, but this mistake could have been costly, considering Nidoking is one of the most versatile Pokemon on the team. Nevertheless, it now faces Dragonite, and strikes it with Thunder. The move is only neutral, but luckily, Dragonite's Blizzard misses, allowing Nidoking to hit it again before fainting this time, which isn't too surprising. Nidoqueen is prayed to come into battle, starting off with Blizzard, which is spammed to ensure victory over the first Dragonite. The next Dragonite comes in, and the RNG gods smile upon us as another Blizzard lands, even though it only has 70% accuracy, and with its double weakness, the second Dragonite falls. 3 Pokemon remain, including Aerodactyl, which Lance chooses to send out. It's faster, but its Hyper Beam doesn't deal much damage, allowing another Blizzard to be unleashed. This time, it's a critical hit, bringing us face to face with Charizard, a Pokemon that theoretically shouldn't pose a problem. While Nidoqueen might not have the right tools to deal with it, Rhydon certainly does, assuming it uses the right moves. Even when using suboptimal moves like Stomp here, it's enough, leaving Lance with just one final Dragonite to avoid losing face. It doesn't look very happy, as evidenced by its attack, and Rhydon is left KO'd. Nidoqueen is called back, and as has been a running gag throughout the challenge, it spams Tail Whip again, an attack that should have been removed, but the player keeps mashing A without controlling which move to use. The consequences are disastrous, as instead of using Blizzard to end the battle, Dragonite has time to lower Nidoqueen's HP several times. Thankfully, we have Hyper Potions before finishing Nidoqueen with Hyper Beam. The main weapon against dragons is down, leaving only Rhyhorn with its disastrous special stat, and Dugtrio, which is 8 levels lower than the champion's ultimate Pokemon. In a panic, the player sends out Dugtrio, and as usual, it spams the A button, allowing Dugtrio to use Sludge Bomb, a move that one-shots Dragonite. It's not surprising, considering Nidoqueen's tail whips significantly lowered Dragonite's defense, so it makes sense that Sludge Bomb, a physical move due to being poison type, would deal massive damage to the pseudo-legendary. This saves the situation a bit and wins the challenge, as it seemed difficult to win the battle without Nidoqueen and Raiden. It's now official, the player has beaten the Pokémon League using Giovanni's team, and admittedly, a few TMs were used, but they exploited the weaknesses I had left well. It was well played, especially considering they changed the battle style to switch instead of set in the options. Lance congratulates us along with Professor Oak, and it's strange to see so many players gathered around Giovanni, whose plans were ultimately foiled by a kid. At the end of the challenge, the chat asked if it was possible to fight Red, and after laughing, I said, "Why not? Let's head to Mount Silver." After the credits rolled, we went to the tall grass near New Bark Town to catch a Pidgey to fly to the Pokémon Center at the base of the game's final dungeon. After navigating through the darkness at the start of the cave, I let the player take control of Giovanni before facing Red. When the battle starts, Nidoking faces Pikachu, and it immediately uses Shadow Ball, dealing decent damage to the level 81 Pokémon. Pikachu can only use normal type moves, so it's logical that Nidoking can take it down in 3 turns. Unfortunately, Red also uses potions, so the damage must be dealt again, requiring a new series of attacks. The player starts using Thunder, which is quite useless against this Pokémon. Therefore, Nidoking is recalled and replaced by Nidoqueen, who is in better health and knows Earthquake. Of course, that's not what it uses, thanks to the A button spamming. Instead, it uses something else. This allows Red to use another potion. Good thing, since it's better to have him waste them on this Pokémon. Finally, the player doesn't miss this time, clicking on Earthquake, which knocks out the little electric mouse. Next, Red sends out Espeon, and immediately, Nidoking returns to battle. This is likely an offensive choice, since Shadow Ball is super effective, but Espeon is faster and uses Psychic, brutally taking down our first Pokémon in 2 hits. Dugtrio is sent out as a replacement, but isn't fast enough, so Espeon strikes first, and Psychic is another one-shot. This is getting tough. Rhyhorn is sent out next, not really to do anything, but to use a full restore on Nidoking. I'm not sure why, as it's unclear what could possibly withstand Espeon's attacks. Sure enough, in the next turn, Nidoking returns, tries Shadow Ball again, but is too slow and gets KO'd. It's a hopeless situation. Nidoqueen is also KO'd, and considering it tried to use Tail Whip, it's clear this isn't going well. Raiden, our best Pokemon, with its terrible special stat, doesn't stand much chance either. The only one left is the little level 2 Pidgey, caught in the tall grass near the first town, facing off against Espeon. The video ends with Giovanni's defeat at the hands of the now teenage Red, whom had defeated the boss of Team Rocket 3 years earlier. I hope you enjoyed this special challenge. We've done a few others, so feel free to check them out. In any case, see you soon. Au revoir.